10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 270. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 270 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us yet again. And this week we're going to bring you our monthly Lick of the Month episode. We're going to be looking at a couple of lines from a fantastic young saxophonist out of New York, Sam Dillon. And I've got a really exciting project that Sam and I have been working on that I'm going to mention in this episode as well. But before we jump into the material of the show, I just want to remind you that you can support this show and get all of the PDFs from every episode that we've ever done by visiting our Patreon page. Patreon is a platform where you can support the creators you love directly with a monthly donation. And this is a listener-supported podcast. That means the only reason we stay in business is because of listeners like you, and we do not do advertisements or anything to distract from the material in this podcast. So if you'd like to get yourself signed up and join the family, we've got over 300 members over there. You can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to all of that material. Quick shout out to our new $5 patron this week. Thank you to William for getting signed up and becoming a member of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. So again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today. So, as I mentioned, this week we are going to be looking at a couple of different phrases from the fantastic saxophonist Sam Dillon. This is from his album Out in the Open. It is his debut album as a leader, contains some amazing jazz standards along with a fantastic band. So go and check out that album today. Sam and I have actually been working on a transcription project for about the past year. I decided that I wanted to go through this album Out in the Open and transcribe every single solo that he plays. And we have just finished the book and released it. So if you like some of this material that you hear today, you can find that book again by going to 10-Minute Jazz Lesson, and on the sidebar, you're going to notice a link to purchase that ebook. They are all the tenor saxophone transcriptions from the entire record, and there is such fantastic material in these solos over standard chord progressions, and you're just really going to enjoy this book. So if that sounds like something that would interest you, you can head over to the website and grab the ebook of all the transcriptions once you're done listening to this episode. So we're going to be taking a look at two phrases off of the title track of the album, Out in the Open. And what these two phrases are going to highlight are really interesting and varied ways, both rhythmically and melodically, of using the pentatonic scale, the minor pentatonic scale. Sam is really a master of using the pentatonic scale in really, really interesting ways. And through transcribing these solos, that is one of the big things that I picked up, was a bunch of new ways to start practicing my pentatonic scales and turn it from like the old stale patterns that everybody learns on the pentatonic into something that is fresh and new and exciting. He's given me a ton of ideas on how to flip the pentatonic scale into something that sounds great. So let's check out the first exercise on the PDF this week, the first solo snippet, and then we'll talk about it. Here it is. So you can hear it's a fantastic little snippet of a solo, and the way that he's playing the pentatonic, layering it with the triplets that he's playing it with, and also the way that he lines up the accents makes for a very, very, very interesting thing to study. So let's dive into the meat and potatoes of what this line is all about. So the first thing that we want to notice is that this line is entirely comprised of a concert F minor pentatonic scale. And the second thing that we want to notice is that it's entirely comprised of triplets, eighth note triplets. And those two things really make this effective. But if we were to only rely on those two elements, it wouldn't be as interesting as it actually is. The thing that Sam does that makes this such a fantastic line is his placement of the accents. So if we look at the beginning of the line, he's just going to run up the F minor pentatonic scale. So he just goes right up from root all the way up to the fifth. But then as he starts to descend, he does this really cool thing where on the way down, he skips a note. So if we look at when he starts to descend, which is beat 4 of the first measure, he starts on the fifth, jumps down to the third. Then he goes down to the fourth, jumps down to the root. Then the third down to the seventh, root down to fifth, seventh down to fourth, fifth down to third, fourth down to root, and then finally he ends it on the third. So he's got this pattern going down where he's descending the scale, but he's skipping a note, then going down to the next note in the scale, so on and so forth. You can make sense of that pattern. Now you'll notice it's a 2-note pattern. That skipping and moving back up comes in 2-note segments. But he's still playing triplets. So this is what makes this line so rich and interesting and fun to listen to, is that he's always accenting the first note of the 2-note pattern, but he's playing it in triplets. So the accent is not always happening on the beat, but it is always happening every 2 notes. And this provides for a really cool texture because the accented note shifts around the beat. So this should instantly give you a pretty cool idea on how you could work on pentatonics, both the pattern that he uses with the skips, descending the scale with the skips, and then also the fact that he's using triplets but shifting around that accent. Those are 2 fantastic ideas that you could take into the practice room immediately and kind of figure out your own way of working on that. Okay, let's jump to the second line. This still involves triplets and it still involves pentatonic scales. And this is really going to give us maybe another idea that we could start to use. So I've included 7 measures in this second excerpt, but I really only want to look at the 5th and 6th measure. The reason why I put those other measures in there were basically just for context, just to get you into this little excerpt, but we're going to be taking a look at 5 and 6. So really focus on that as we go through this and listen to it first. Okay, so let's dive into those 2 measures. So again, he is using an F minor concert pentatonic. And in this one, he does this really cool thing with triplets again. So again, we're only using the notes from the pentatonic in those selected measures, and we are only using triplets. But what he does here is really cool. He only takes the first 2 notes from every 8th note triplet, and he does some really interesting things with intervals in this second exercise. So one of the things that we get caught in that I think is a trap is that when we play 8th note triplets, generally we always play all 3 notes of the triplet. And Sam is really showing us that we can do a lot more with triplets than we think, at first glance or at first thought. So what he's doing is he's using the rhythmic scheme of a triplet to his advantage, but he's not filling out the entire triplet, which I think is really cool. You get a little bit of silence on every beat, but you still get that rhythmic feel of him playing 8th note triplets. Now, what he does with the intervals is also really cool. He's switching back and forth between thirds, fourths, and a fifth when he's playing this. And this pattern is really interesting. So what he starts on beat 2 of the fifth measure of the second exercise is he starts by playing a third. He goes from the fifth up to the seventh. And then he jumps up to the third and goes down to the seventh. So now we have a fourth going down. Then he goes to the root, plays the root to the fourth. So now we have a fourth going up. Then he plays the third to the fifth, so now we have a third going up. And then he goes down to the fourth and plays down to the seventh, so now we have a fifth going down. And then we have the root to the third again, so a third going up. And then he rockets off into outer space with a crazy chromatic line after that. And you could hear it on the recording. It's just, he plays his butt off at the end of this. So the thing I want you to notice is twofold here. The first thing is he's playing mixed intervals. He's very, very familiar with the pentatonic scale, and he's able to play all of these different intervals that are involved in the pentatonic scale. And the other thing that he's doing is he's changing directions. Those two things combined, mixed intervals along with changing directions, combined with the triplet scheme with one note left out, really make this an awesome line that is just going to propel him into the next phrase that he plays. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed the breakdown of those two lines. Let me know if you have any questions. A good place to get in touch with me is on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can always reach out 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. And remember, you can get this entire album's worth of transcribed solos if his sound and his way of playing is something that you dig. This book is a treasure trove of stuff like that. So go to 10minutejazzlesson.com. You will find on the sidebar, you can see the cover of the ebook, and that will bring you to a link to download it. And Sam and I have been working really, really hard on this project, and we hope that you enjoy it. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week with another Tune of the Month episode. And I hope everybody's doing well out there, staying safe and healthy. And as always, hope this episode was of some use to you. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.